Of all the topics in the petrolhead world with the potential to go nuclear in terms of vitriol, very few come close to the automatic versus manual debate. And I would actually go so far as to wager good money that the vast majority of those of us who do prefer automatics probably just choose to stay quiet instead of having the other 99% of people batter them over the head into either silent submission or downright agreement. Well, as many of you know, I'm not the kind of person to roll over to that, so this video is explaining why I prefer automatics, because it is a question which comes up, especially for those of you who watch, for example, my Beards and Cars car review series, or maybe even Beards and Bikes, where I've reviewed some motorcycles on the channel as well. And the question is, of course, the one which I alluded to, autos versus manuals, or when it comes to this video, why do I choose autos so often? Why do I prefer them? Do I, as an automotive journalist who reports on the news in the car world, reviews cars, drives fast cars, owns fast cars, and of course loves fast cars, and who grew up on all things cars, how on earth could I possibly love anything but the manual gearbox? Surely it's God's gift to petrolheads. Well, I've got 6 reasons, and I know I said 5 in the thumb, but that is the interesting thing, because these 5 primary reasons are fact-based. The 6th reason is interesting, because we're going to get to it last. It is both the least fact-based, but also the most important of all. Now, for a little bit of backstory to justify why I, of all people, could even talk on the subject if I dare to defy the manual gods, well, I drive manual cars every week in my work outside of YouTube. I also happen to own automatic cars, sometimes with paddles, sometimes not. I'm a mechanic by trade officially, so I've worked on my fair share of manual and automatic gearboxes, and of course I've driven both manual and auto cars on the channel, including, for instance, manual Ferrari F355s, Porsche Boxsters, Honda Civic Type Rs, etc. I did all of my driving lessons in a manual car, passed my test in a manual car, and as if that wasn't enough, most of the motorcycles which I've ridden, including the ones which I did my lessons and passed my test on, were indeed manual. So with all of that out of the way, let's get into the reasons why. Reason number 1, manuals have less gears. For a manual car to have anything more than 6 gears immediately starts to become a problem, which is why it's so rare to see a 7-speed manual. Now, I believe Porsche actually did that in one of their 911s, and you immediately come up against the awkwardness of having 7 gear gates to potentially lock that shifter into. Now, I'm not saying it's impossible to use, of course not, but simply having less gears has a number of knock-on effects that go far beyond just having a gear stick rammed into your passenger's leg. And that is that less gears means less efficiency, potentially less speed in certain vehicles as well, and worse fuel economy. Because for those who don't know, the purpose of a gearbox is not just about speed. In fact, in normal cars, it's nothing to do with speed and all to do with efficiency. It's giving you the right amount of torque at any given moment to maximize the efficiency and get the most out of that engine, the most torque. Since a gearbox, or a transmission, as it's commonly referred to by our American friends, is literally a torque converter. That is its primary purpose. Now, having less gears isn't necessarily a deal breaker, but as I said, it is one of my 5 core reasons, and that is a fact. You will not see a conventional clutch-pedaled, stick shift 10-speed anytime soon. Not unless it's some weird variation from like the 1930s which didn't work anything like today. I'm talking a modern manual with that many gears. It's just not going to happen. It's not efficient enough in terms of physical parameters for that to happen. The knock-on effect is that you simply don't have the advantages of, for instance, an 8, 9, 10-speed auto with better efficiency, etc. across the board. And efficiency is something which we're going to come back to again. Reason number 2 is more personal, and this is one which will immediately have some people saying, oh, there you go, it's all personal opinion. Reason number 2 is actually a needless third pedal. But before you jump on my head for saying that, think of it this way. You might not mind using a third pedal, but as I said, this is my 5 reasons, and as a 6'3" bigger guy, I can tell you categorically that when those tiny Italian men and women who built the Ferrari F355 built that manual gearbox, with those 3 tiny Italian pedals placed so close together that a gnat would have to breathe in between them, I can easily press 2 pedals at once without wanting to. That's not exactly ideal, and in many cars that's an issue. The tiny Peugeot 208 that I did my driving lessons in years ago had the same problem, and I hate to break it to you, but it's not a problem I need to have, because I can just choose a car that, you guessed it, has 2 pedals, which are just as functional instead of 3. So once again, it's a physical issue, which just doesn't need to be there. And in fact, there is a way around that, which I would love to see done if it hasn't been tested already. In fact, I have vague memories of Hyundai, I believe it was, potentially trying this, maybe even Porsche, but that is a clutchless manual. I would be hugely interested, in fact, and this is kind of an olive branch, so go with me here, I would be very interested in test driving a clutchless manual, something with a actual stick, which you put into gear gates like you usually would, but with 2 pedals. And the way that would work is simple. Instead of having a clutch pedal, you have a button on the shifter, which would kind of represent you telling the car that you now want to change gear. So an electronic clutch. You grab hold of the shifter, press that button which tells the car to electronically engage the clutch, you put it into the gear you want and release the button. So it's essentially like the pedal, but it gets rid of the third pedal and streamlines the whole thing physically speaking. Moving on though to reason number 3, this one is actually also to do with the clutch, but not to do with the pedal. This is an issue which that electronic clutch that I mentioned would potentially solve, but with the clutch pedal, it is an ongoing thing, and any mechanic who's done any work on any kind of manual car at least can attest to this. There is so much more room for human error in a manual gearbox and in terms of replacing, repairing, and frankly ruining components as there are in a comparative automatic. However, in a manual, well, now you've got the human error of clutch control. That's just not a problem in automatics in anything like the same way. Not to say that autos never break down or that they never need repairs or that a bad driver couldn't break one, of course. But the amount of work is not even comparable. So many more manuals have so many more problems, not because there's anything wrong with the gearbox, but because there's plenty wrong with the driver. And if you can eliminate that aspect of human error, well, why wouldn't you want to? There are plenty of people who think that they're experienced drivers. I've been in many a car with an older driver who's been on the road for way longer than me, and they clearly don't have a clue what a clutch actually does, because you can tell from the way they use it. They treat it like a big old switch. No, it isn't. There is nuance to the clutch. And I'm not saying that I'm a rally driver by any stretch, but at least I know what is actually happening in the car, because that's where my past comes from. That's what I'm qualified in, and so many people don't. They're taught how to use something, but not how it works. And that's a dangerous position to be in, because if you don't really understand what's happening behind the magical wall of the footwell, well, of course you're going to have mistakes, and of course you're not going to take it as seriously. So, in other words, let's just get rid of the human error, and an automatic goes a long way toward removing the human error of not having a clue how to use a clutch properly. Reason number 4, though, is actually going to be probably the most controversial one on the list, but hold your horses, manual fans, and especially manual elitists, because this one is another one that you can't really argue with, and that is that they're slower. Yes, I said it. Manuals are slower. Now, here's an interesting thing, and this is a crucial, a nexus point in this argument. So many, and when I say so many, I mean most, the vast majority of manual superfans and elitists conveniently forget that we're not talking about 1970s manuals versus 1970s automatics. We're talking about today, because I will fully agree with you that back then, autos were mostly horrendous. But that's not the case anymore. In fact, back then, every single advantage on this list would have pretty much been flipped the other way around. But now we are so much further on. Cars these days, which don't even cost all that much, will have much better gearbox technology than something like a sports car in the 70s would have had. Now, this one is, again, talking about performance, and that is crucial to the timeline, because back in the day, autos were more sluggish. You had less gears to work with. Again, talking about many of the points which I referenced here. However, a perfect example of this working in my favour as an auto fan is the Alfa Romeo Giulia, the Quadrifoglio in particular, which I inaccurately pronounced in its own review recently, so apologies for that. But Alfa Romeo themselves took that Giulia around the Nürburgring, the Nordschleife circuit, twice. Probably more than twice, but twice in terms of lap records. And wait for it, the auto was faster. 7 seconds faster. It has more gears, the computer does the work instead of the driver, or you can use those magical paddles. What do you know, a manual without a clutch pedal, almost as if I was talking about that earlier on. And the Alfa Romeo is just one example. Now, there are certain circumstances where I will concede a manual could well be superior. Drag racing, for example. Those kind of fraction of a second time frames, I could see a driver knowing his machine better than a computer would. But let's be honest, that's mostly because the machine hasn't been programmed to know what a drag race is. If you developed, for instance, Porsche, this is something that they would probably do, a car to go into a drag mode, well then of course it's going to beat the driver. You just scale that up to a car with much more power. So even in circumstances where back in the day it would have been pros only doing this kind of stuff, like a rally car with a sequential, or a drag car with a manual, nowadays you could program a machine to be just as fast, if not faster. Plus, to go back to the point that I mentioned way earlier on in the video, because you have more gears as well, well, in a performance sense, you could even get more top speed out of a car thanks to those gears as well. The last of my 5 factual reasons, though, is in effect going back to what I mentioned about having less gears, but this one much more specifically, and a lot of people won't realise this, and that's why I need to tell you about it, is efficiency. Automatics, as I said, did not used to be efficient. They used to be slower, clunkier, less reliable, and really bad for fuel. That simply isn't the case anymore. Now they have more gears, better acceleration, less driver error, and crucially, because you have more gears, because the computer knows 9 times out of 10 better than you what gear you need to be in, certainly when you've got 8 to 10 to choose from, you can actually extract more miles per gallon out of a car than you can with a manual. Now again, that wouldn't necessarily apply to an older vehicle, but to current technology, every time that is the case. So it's not just about performance, it's not just about bragging rights or how many gears you've got, it actually has a valid reason. Having more gears, the way the system works, the advanced programming of today's autos versus decades ago means that quite literally you will get better value for money out of an auto in terms of how much fuel you use than a manual will. Now, you may disagree with some of the points that I've said. You may even have some interesting facts to bring in, and of course I'd love to hear those down below. But now we need to get to the 6th reason. What if you still just like manuals more? What if you don't care about what I said? What if you just love pressing that pedal, feeling that immaculate shift into the next gate of your Lamborghini Gallardo manual, or your F355 Ferrari, or your Porsche GT3? What if you just like it more? Well, that right there is reason number 6. Personal preference. And in many ways, this is the ultimate reason. It's the least fact-based, but it matters the most. Why ultimately do I prefer automatics over manuals? Because I do. Why do manual fans prefer them over autos? Because you do. It's personal preference. If you still prefer them, then go for it. I would never hold that against you, and I could certainly understand the appeal. Even the manuals that I've driven, although I wouldn't choose it if there were an auto option, I get it. Getting that perfect shift is rewarding, and it is fun. I will even say that a open-gated Ferrari shifter is gorgeous to look at. So much like with many of my opinions on cars, I can fully appreciate the opposition without necessarily needing to join their camp. And I believe that if nothing else, please take that away from this video. Don't act, if you are a petrolhead with a strong view in a particular way, don't act like if somebody disagrees it's necessarily a personal attack. Even if they mean it as a personal attack, it doesn't really matter. What you believe and what you prefer is just that. But ultimately, that's it for the reasons why I personally prefer autos. Give me some reasons why maybe you do, or maybe why you prefer autos down below. And of course, the piece de resistance on the top of all of this is, of course, that automatics have the trump card of flappy paddles. So once again, you can kind of negate even the advantages that manuals can have by putting control back in the driver's hands. But again, without the clutch pedal. Overall though, that's it for this vid. Of course, I'll see you next time, and be sure to check out other stuff on the channel, because of course, there's quite a lot of car content here. But until next time, I'll see you then, and for now, as always, thanks for watching.